I decided to call this topic today Clashes of Temperament because I think the elements in the birth chart, the balance that we all have between fire, water, earth, and air, and don't forget that we all have all those elements in the chart. Nothing is ever completely missing because if it is missing, we're not going to be able to function at all in the world. We need them all and they're all there, even if you don't have any planets in some of them. Maybe even when you don't have any planets in some of them, this is a sign of that element somehow subconsciously functioning on autopilot in your chart and in your life, which doesn't guarantee it's going to work very well. Maybe you don't simply pay attention to it, and it's there in the background, sometimes causing unexpected problems, but you're simply not concentrating on it too much, or you're not consciously taking it and doing something with it, knowing what you're doing. But we do have all of them. Now, the thing is the balance inside the chart. How much of what? And we are so used to, especially when we first begin studying astrology, and that was my initial step in to the books of Stephen Arroyo. Do you read Stephen Arroyo? You know, probably the book about the elements. I think this is probably one of the most famous books focusing on the elements themselves, even though Liz Green has some material in her book Relating. That's very interesting as well. I haven't been through that recently, but I had a glance back at the Royals book, and I took out from there certain things I wanted to tell you today. Maybe you know them, but I had forgotten them. And I thought they are a very good system of looking at a chart in a more simplified way. And just another perspective. You know, every time I tell you different tips about what to look for and how to put two and two together using my own methods, you can have your own. But if we focus just on the balance of the elements, not just planets in signs, but also houses, then maybe we have a bit of a shortcut, but also a very good way to explain things to someone that has no idea about it. And to have a very quick gateway in talking about astrology using simple language, using examples from real life, and things related to everyday relationships with people close to us and the world that can very quickly, I have found, convince people that we are dealing with something extremely valuable and it's worth it to go deeper into it. I think the books of Stephen Arroyo were one of those that got me into astrology myself. And yeah, in the beginning, it all sounds like a foreign language, as you know. But this psychological approach, using the elements as reflectors of the different signs, you know, each element has a group of 3 signs belonging to it, was my way to study as a beginner. And later on, you see that things are a bit more complicated, that you have to add elements to that. But we're going a little bit back to basics today with the elements. So I just wanted to basically give you this disclaimer that I'm deliberately going to be simplifying, just because sometimes it's better to do that than to, you know, theoreticize too much on other techniques and so on and so forth. Okay, so going back to my idea about the balance we all have of the 4 elements inside our charts, inevitably there will be, out of all the planets that we study in psychological astrology, there would be some sort of distribution of how many of them are in signs belonging to the air, fire, water, earth element. And if we find certain patterns, they definitely mean something and they affect us in our general disposition about the energy dynamic. The elements are so much about energy dynamic of interchange and mirroring or seeing the world around us. How we live our everyday lives and what we pay attention to, what grabs our attention, what we give more importance to, and what we are more willing to practice directly. And that creates lots of differences, temperamental differences between people. especially in families or close relationships, in couples, in family relationships, all sorts of everyday interactions where we need to put up with other people all the time and they with us. Knowledge about the element balance in the chart can help a lot, I think, especially when you're advising somebody and you are playing the role of a counselor or a psychologist, at least for a little bit. You can use the language of the symbols of the elements without even mentioning anything else technical about astrology, maybe even without mentioning the names of the signs or the houses or anything like this, but just talking about the perception of the world, that if we imagine each one of those four elements exaggerated and we just say to people what this is prone to and how that colors its convictions, its choices, its motivation, then I have found that this is one of the most effective ways to help people relate to each other much better, because they simply get um, an understanding about how the other person functions and why they're doing the things they're doing the way they are doing them, what sits behind their energy field, and why are they, for example, a little bit more introverted or a little bit more extroverted? Why are they more active, pessimistic or optimistic? Again, I'm simplifying, but you can see, and I'm sure you know a lot about this already, you can see that each one of those elements, when too much in a chart or too little of it in a chart, creates certain predispositions which are making the scales weigh more on one side than another. Now, maybe, at least this is what Stephen Arroyo says, and I kind of agree, that the very first thing we need to try to notice in the chart is in which elements the sun, the moon, and the ascendant are, because definitely these elements will be important in the way we behave and in the way we conceive the world. But I mean, they might be all the same. Some people have all three of these very important placements in the same element, which is a major emphasis on that element. Others have them all in different places. That's why I mentioned earlier that this girl that I'm waiting for, that may not come today, she has these different elements mixed in such a random way. Maybe, I mean, nothing is random in a chart. Everything is extremely meaningful for this particular person in their lifetime. But she has every single planet of the personal planets represented by a different sign. So we end up with, and they're consecutive in many, I mean, I think four of them were consecutive, which gives us a chance to examine how maybe they merge into one another, they're connected to one another. And since times immemorial, people studying astrology have been considering the natural forces, and the elements have been mostly viewed as natural spirits, natural forces. There are even those characters, the spirit of air, the spirit of water. They are mythological and fairy tale characters that give us a shortcut also to the character of this particular way of perceiving reality. So, what is real to you? What is meaningful to you? And why are you giving a bit more, like even a value judgment, which gradates different things in your life very differently from another person? So, in other words, we're all very biased because of the balance of the elements in our chart. And let's see something now, which is a reminder, but also something that I've been playing in my mind with in the last few days, and discovering again new things, even though I now consider myself a bit more advanced because it's been years and years of studying this. But I came back to these basic things and I discovered that there was more to see and to kind of put in order, so that we can explain things to ourselves and explain them to others also. Stephen Arroyo I like something that he did with information, which obviously he took from the writings of Dane Rudier. He was a student of Dane Rudier. And you probably know Rudier's style of writing is a bit difficult to grasp unless you're very motivated and you're very particularly interested. And energetically, temperamentally, if you're on his wavelength. So, as you know, I love Rudier. I read him all the time. I try to get into the messages in his writings, and it gets easier and easier over the years. But if I start talking about his words, his classifications, I'm afraid we're going to get a bit more confused than otherwise. So, I think what Arroyo did, he did our homework for us, and he was so brilliant, and he is, I think he's still active. He is so brilliant in simplifying difficult things, making concepts that are, I mean, hard to remember, hard to order, because astrology is this foreign language that has its grammar, its system of different concepts and words and so on, which we need to, at the end of the day, memorize at least a little bit to get into it. So I always recommend him as a teacher for beginners, or if someone is a bit interested when we have a general conversation and I mention astrology and they get curious and ask me, can you recommend something I read, or where do I start with all this if I want to get deeper into it? Then he's one of those that I normally send people to. So he, I think, took this idea of studying the four elements in the chart, again, through the zodiac, but the zodiac not as some imaginary forces out there, fields of energy coming from who knows where, from the constellations, or just from the places in this division of the area, the sphere around us, into 12 equal sections. And people in the past probably imagined the zodiac and the yearly cycle of the earth around the sun more as things that happen. So a little bit of time passes, we have the seasons change, and now we are experiencing a different condition out there, which reflects our inner condition or what we are supposed to do with our energies in this season. Everything is very seasonal. But later on, when people started considering this from an intellectual point of view and describing it in concepts and so on, it became also division of space around us. So the 12 signs of the zodiac have 4 groups and 3 groups. So it is kind of inevitable to talk about the 4 elements without mixing that with the modes, the so-called modes in astrology, which are, as you know, the cardinal, the fixed, and the mutable. So Rudier has a very interesting article. It's called something like A New Approach to the Zodiac, where he goes through, it's pretty short, it goes through this mixture between elements and modes, and how he says at the end of the day, we actually have something like 3 zodiacs. Why 3? Because all the cardinal signs in the zodiac are connected to those major turning points of the year, the 2 solstices and the 2 equinoxes, and something is meant to happen there to begin a new impulse, a new process. But each one of these 4 turning points of the year that are peak experiences of something, and then we make a turn, we go in a different direction, or we start from there literally, and the process is activated. But all 4 are different because all 4 are representatives of each one of the 4 elements of nature. Aries, the spring equinox, is a new beginning through fire. Cancer, the summer solstice, is a new beginning through water. The autumn equinox, which we recently had, a new beginning through the air sign Libra. And then finally, we've got the earth up there, or in the darkest moment in the middle of winter, which is Capricorn. So these 4 are like representatives of each way of doing things. So basically, when we speak about how to interpret having planets in certain signs of the zodiac in your chart, what does the signs mean connected to the planets? We very often use the word temperament or style or the way we're doing things, the premonition we have when we're doing things. It's like a method or way of approaching reality. It's not the actual action. The action is the houses. So each sign we can associate, of course, with each house. And then we can also have houses that are related to the elements. So the first house, Aries, the fourth house, Cancer, the seventh house, Libra, and the 10th house, Capricorn. We can choose to look at this way as well. Basic astrology today, but I think now I'm gonna go towards a mix which uses certain keywords proposed by a royal, and I find those keywords very revealing. Then I'll just quickly go through them. Then we'll go to the charts and try to apply the mix between something you've got in a planet, like a planet you've got in a sign, and in a house. And then we're going to say, so you have Mercury, say in the third house in Sagittarius, whatever. So how are you being a Sagittarius dealing with things or doing things that are third house? But then we are not going to use the word Sagittarius and third house, but those particular keywords of what is supposed to happen there as a main theme that is considered from the perspective of the four elements in nature. I will show you a quick table in a moment. So just quickly to say, actually, maybe this is a good place now to switch to that little very, very easy table where you can see what I'm talking about. Here we go. So, are you able to see it all right? Okay, so we have, as you know, fire, earth, air, and water. Two so-called masculine, more active, more outgoing fire and air, and the ones that we expect to be a bit more internal, a bit more kind of related to what we call the feminine forces of nature, the earth and water. But let's go deeper now. Here are four keywords that give us like a pointer of the main topic of each element. The fire signs of the zodiac, and we've got three of each, as you can see. The fire signs of the zodiac are all having something in common. There is only one cardinal from them, the beginner of all fiery action, Aries. The other two are fixed and mutable, respectively. But that's the overall logic. So we've got each one of the elements in each one of the modes. And when we multiply one by the other, we've got the 12 signs of the zodiac. Same with the houses. So what is fire concerned about and focusing on? All the three signs of the zodiac are doing one similar thing, but in three different ways. Or maybe we can even think of it as three different stages or three different levels of operation. Nothing is better than the other. So in no way is Leo more advanced than Aries or Sagittarius more advanced than Leo or anything like this. But they all have three different fields of action. So fire is a lot about identity, building identity in three steps. First of all, with the first sign of the zodiac, and maybe we choose to begin from there, from the spring equinox in the spring, because there is this feeling in nature of a new beginning in the spring. It was very natural, wasn't it, to choose that moment as the beginning of the astrological year. But equally, we could have chosen the winter solstice, for example, because something of a new beginning is happening there too. That seed that bursts out and comes out from the soil as as a new existing plant that we can see now growing, starting to grow in Aries, was planted in Capricorn. So maybe some people can say the whole thing should start in Capricorn because that's where the new life was born. This is a bit of an allegory to Christ being born. Maybe this is what it means at the end of the day. Yeah. But going back to fire, we are choosing to start with fire because that's the element out of the four that has mostly this energy of new beginning, getting out there, starting to move in a direction out, and trying to overcome the past, trying to overcome the residue of what has been before, not completely wipe it out, but being able to distance yourself enough in order to have the enthusiasm and the desire for action to go out there. And here, all the cardinal signs, which Aries is the first of, are actional signs. They do something, they begin something, and they get out there. But when it's fire mixed with cardinal, then we have identity looking to be defined through action. So therefore, what Aries is usually doing is just immersing itself into activities, going on a journey which has a forward trajectory. The idea is to look forward and not look back, because there is still a fear of looking back and what that can bring it into, as Aries is still very close to the last sign, Pisces, which is the end of the previous cycle. So Aries is very motivated to be young, to offer something new, and action is really everything here. Still, he doesn't know who he or she is, and what it's all about. But the most important thing is to be out there and to experience it. And that's how identity is being given an ability to be out there and show itself. Then in Leo, we switch to another mode. We are again concerned with identity because that's the thing that the fire signs have in common: energy, enthusiasm, forward-looking ideas. And basically, we're trying to keep a flame burning, literally, here, with a lot of exhaustion very often, with a lot of waste of energy if this is not balanced. But that's the most animated of the four elements. It's got the most in its reservoir of physical and psychological energy to dispense of, so it needs different fields of action. But then when we get to Leo, Leo belongs to the second group of zodiac signs if we divide them into groups. And it's very different because it's fixed. And all the fixed signs have this in common, that they are very concerned with security. There is some sort of insecurity with all the fixed signs. They're trying to either prove something to themselves or prove something to others or stabilize a situation or accumulate certain things in order to feel that things are not going to be so easy to destroy. So Leo is very much about building, showing, creating, and displaying the fruits of one's identity, which is now in Leo a bit more defined, a bit more kind of ego-centered, but doing it in such a way that it's not going to be easily destroyed. So security of identity is a key word here. How do I assert myself out there, not just to be alive like Aries and to exist despite all odds? I'm not so much trying to overcome danger and to survive, but here in Leo, I'm trying to stabilize myself, secure myself in a particular position. But I'm doing that through the fire element. So my method is fiery. I'm going to show all those people what I'm capable of. I'm going to produce things that come from my identity, from my personality, that would be long lasting, that would not be easily destroyed, and that would keep being here even after I'm gone. And it's very important that I make a lasting impression on others as well, because if I don't, it's very often a question of life and death. It's a very security-oriented sign because it's fixed. Now, when we get to the third one of fire signs, again, we shift the focus. Now, Aries was so much alone, concerned with itself. So it's doing what it's doing because it feels and wants it to be so. Leo now looks around and complies with what maybe the expectations of others, especially one-to-one relationships, might be, and this is in a way trying to impress individual people around it. Sagittarius is the social one. All the mutable signs and mutable fire is another word for Sagittarius. So these are like code words. If we say mutable fire, there is only one option there, Sagittarius. So the mutable fire is now at another field, much broader. And again, let's go back to the identity thing. Sagittarius is also about identity, but it's trying to look for, search, and figure out its identity based on what it decides to get involved in, what out there in the world of common living with other people in society. In this world, there are norms, regulations, cultural stuff, religion, knowledge of different cultural ways of doing things. It's how we live together, society, and how this society then is going to develop itself so that it's good for everyone. Everyone feels as an individual well inside it. But in all of this searching and learning and examining, including the traveling that Sagittarius is prone to do, it's also motivated by finding out who that person is, figuring it out in their own head. It's almost like they're lost and they want to be found, to find themselves. And in order to do that, they study so many different things so that they can then point to only some of those things and say, this is my thing. This is what I would like to identify with. This is what I would like to allow into my life, or what I would like to dedicate my resources or force or whatever to. Sagittarius has this intuitive, and the fire element is concerned with intuition. Aries goes wherever it goes into new fields, traveling forward intuitively. Leo is acting and impressing intuitively. And Sagittarius is learning and searching also intuitively. But that sort of intuition that these three have is about smelling in the air what exists out there in the world, which they haven't seen yet, they haven't found or experienced yet, but is a potential. So they're looking for opportunities to do these three things: assert your identity individually, and this way giving an example, Aries, impressing your identity on others, Leo, or in Sagittarius, even going further, when you find a certain teaching or a certain cultural thing that you would like to propagate or be part of, then you become together with other people that want to join hands with you in a very Jupiterian way. Jupiter rules Sagittarius. In a very Jupiterian way, you come together and you now can influence the world through your identifying with certain things and not others. This is why people can become very fanatical in Sagittarius, because they really strongly need to identify with something in particular. And when they identify with one thing, this automatically excludes the other options. So Sagittarius is a very selective energy. It wants, so it learns so that it can find its way around, but once it chooses intuitively what it's attracted to, that's it. And then this becomes a philosophy of life. It needs to build its own philosophy. Doesn't start with it in the beginning. If you know someone with the sun in Sagittarius, for example, you might say, well, they're very often quite scattered and they go here and there. They never kind of pin themselves to the same place all the time. But actually, the idea is with them to find an identity orientation. Okay, enough for the fire. Actually, we'll go back to fire to say more about it later, but this is just to give you like an orientation in the table. So action, security, learning. How is the same game played through the earth element? Now, all the earth signs are naturally very connected to material reality, to everything that we can sense, touch, smell, eat, and whatever. So this is the most physical of all the four and the most tangible. But that could be also the concept of possessions. You can find your possessions being things which are not tangible, including skills, including money in the bank account, which is just like a number there, and you can't actually physically work with them. But the material world is really the focus. Being inhabiting a body and taking care of that body, using it as a vehicle for life, getting a lot of your energy from recharging that particular field. So, giving yourself earthly food, actual food, and other things related to that is what charges the batteries of people that have a lot of earth or the sun is in earth. Well, with fire, we had a different situation. There, we needed um, some idea to run after, or some dream, or some distant future concept that inspires us. So we're looking for inspiration that can remain a lot in our heads without materializing necessarily. But with earth, we need to materialize. We need to leave a trace and to make sure that something, even though that's the big tragedy of the earth element, that nothing really lasts forever. And regardless of how stable foundation you build and how many possessions or elements of accumulated stuff you attract and gather, you're not always going to have them. We are mortal, and Saturn, the most earthly of all the planets, is constantly reminding us that we cannot um, cling to possessions. But at the end of the day, nature is saying part of life is making things happen here, now, on Earth. We can be very knowledgeable, intuitive. We can have great ideas, but at the end of the day, we're here to live a physical life, and we need to contribute to that or be able to materialize it. So, want it or not, we cannot escape from this one as well. But because this one is so-called feminine, it's a great contrast to the fire. Not so enthusiastic, not so optimistic, even the contrary. Because of this Saturnian link, maybe, we are more prone to seeing limits and seeing what may not work or what may get destroyed or will be very difficult to earn or to collect because it will take time, time, the other thing about Saturn. So there is such a gravity about Earth, heaviness. And again, we have three signs. They are doing three different things in the material world. Capricorn, the cardinal one, the starter in the winter, is supposed to, and this is what we're meant to do in the 10th house as an action, it is supposed to do something with the earth energies, basically act on them. What does this mean? So if you are in a managerial role, for example, if you need to deal with organizing people, resources, material elements, and the way you do them, the way you play and juggle with them, and the decisions you make, they have a very big impact then on things around, on the material world. You can either be a very good manager of resources or a very bad one as a Capricorn, but at the end of the day, you've got this responsibility. And that is mostly why people that have a lot of this energy very often tend to be extremely hardworking to the point of breaking down and not knowing where to stop, because that's something in common between all the cardinal signs. There is this tension. I have to do, I have to, I need to be behind some sort of never stopping action. But it has different faces, temperaments in the different elements. This one here is so like focused into taking what's there, what is available as resources in the world, and regrouping it, ordering it in another way, and and managing it, like telling everybody and everything what to do and where to be in the big system of things, so that it produces a result that improves the material circumstances of not just individual people, but whole nations very often. Capricorn is the ultimate prime minister or manager of large organizations of people, where they need to um, take very good care of how efficiently and how cleverly things are being managed. So then Taurus. So here you see, from Aries we went to Leo and then Sagittarius, in this natural way of how we uh, usually go through the signs. Because if we imagine the wheel of the zodiac and the different signs one after the other in order, then Aries is the first, Leo is the fifth, and Sagittarius is the ninth. But here from Capricorn, the 10th, because we started from Capricorn, we're going counterclockwise all the time. So the question is, what is the next sign in order counterclockwise in the wheel of the zodiac after Capricorn? And that would be Taurus, not Virgo. So because we started from the cardinal Capricorn, the fixed, which is always after that, is Taurus. And here, because Taurus is one of the early signs of the zodiac, like Aries, again, we are very personal. We are more about ourselves personally, individually. And again, because it's fixed, we bring back the idea of security. Leo wanted to secure its identity. Taurus would naturally want to secure its material environment. Has to feel that things are not going to collapse around it at any moment, but it's got enough resources. It's not stingy, it's not greedy, not at least not in its natural state, in its positive state. Taurus is simply very concerned about not remaining without. It's a builder. It needs to build in order to stabilize. And then whatever it managed to stabilize, it can then be used to grow from there. But if you don't stabilize, if you don't secure your material survival first, and make it easy, make it comfortable, make it with the least possible expenditure of energy, not like Aries running around all the time and being extremely like outgoing and dispersing its energy. Here, Taurus wants to focus like a typical fixed energy. And that sits behind its motivation, why it's doing the things it is doing, because there is fear there. All the fixed signs are fearing something. That's why they look for security, but how they get this security is different. So, what they need in order to feel secure. Taurus needs material stuff. Then Virgo is material, yes, but it's so much more changeable and flexible because it belongs to the mutables. And all the mutables are searchers or researchers or experimentators, because in fixed signs that follow cardinal, there is often stagnation. You know, Leo, Taurus, Aquarius, Scorpio, in their search for security, they may find it, may reach a point when they think, okay, yeah, that now feels a bit better. I feel more secure, but they would be very tempted to stay there and not move and not change, not grow. And this is, I mean, potentially stagnation. That's where all the fixed signs naturally go to, unless the mutable ones don't come over and help them get out of the rut and begin a new action. So something has to be adjusted every now and then. Something needs to be brought to another level, or the field of action has to be expanded, or something has to be improved. That's what the learning mutable signs are dealing with. Again, in 4 different ways. And when they manage to do that, they clear the air, and then the cardinals come again and they begin a new process, yet a new process, because they now have something to begin with again. But they are very impatient. They're beginning it, but they don't want to stay with it. So the fixed come after them and they start going deeper into the process. So I very much like this comparison And I've been telling it to people all the time in the past, especially to beginners. I try to tell them, okay, if we're talking about one of the cardinal signs, and we know that they have a lot of cardinal energy in their chart. And instead of telling them, look, you've got a lot of cardinal, and they look at me and say, what does this mean? Sounds serious, but what is this? Then I try to say, if you are predominantly cardinal, then you are going into a straight line. So your motion forward in life is like in a straight line. You go on a path, and that path is continuous, it's flowing down, and you don't stray too much around. You don't look back, you don't travel in the opposite direction. You have like some sort of a imaginary or intuitively felt goal towards which you are traveling. So you keep doing things in order to get closer and closer and closer, but you're very directional. Because you're so directional, you can be very, like, nobody can convince you of something that you don't already believe in. Have you noticed how much the cardinal people, cardinal signs, they are, whatever they believe in or whatever they've decided to do, they might listen to you and you express a different approach, but they might say, yeah, that sounds really good. And then when you separate, they go on and do it like they always did it. Yeah, they might make, small adjustments here and there, but when we talk about the main direction of life, the most important things they're going to have to choose, then usually there is very little change there. Uh, Fixed signs go in a circle. So cardinal in a straight line, fixed in a circle. This going in a circle is what leads to the stagnation that I mentioned before, because it's the same circle at the end of the day. You go around and around and around, and even if you kind of learn how to do it perfectly, whatever you are building there, and the four elements of the fixed signs are all working on like a project, and they are developing that project over time. They stay with it, they stay put. It's very difficult to, again, to destroy their concentration to that goal, because they can go through a lot of difficulty. You see the stubbornness of Taurus, the insistence of Leo in its pursuits, the tendency of Scorpio to be in a maniac way, uh, kind of with somebody, like stay there, be loyal. Aquarius is intellectual stability, like really examining concepts deep and deep and deep over the course of a long time. This is because they go in a circle. But then what does it happen? It happen when we mix the straight line with the circle? We get a spiral. And that's the strategy of the mutable signs. They go forward, but as they go forward, they also go in a circle. So that's magical, isn't it? I really like that. As they're able to, by going forward, to bring the level at which the circle, the process is happening at different stages or at different fields of experience. And that makes life a lot richer, a lot more interesting, and most importantly, allows for development and for, if we choose to believe in that, is some sort of evolution. So going back to our little table, I went too far already, but Virgo is trying to learn how to effectively exist in the material world. This is why there is this emphasis on skills or on health or on care of the body or things like this, because there is always something to fix, or there is always something that we are not doing very well yet in the material world. And it always helps if we learn more and we try to do it. So we are diligent, we are kind of working on it. We're learning. Yeah, that's what Virgo is doing. By doing all those repairs and teachings and learning and so on, it's learning what's at the basis of it in order to get better at it. Like Sagittarius was exploring in order to better get into a connection to its identity. Now, Virgo just wants to be more adept in the material world, more skillful there, because the more skillful, the more efficient, and then There is something about this here that at the end of the day, also signs follow one another in a process, in a cycle. The cycle begins with Aries. It's a growing up kind of thing. And they all need to do something in order to pass the boundary from themselves to the next, and to the next, and to the next. So Virgo is doing all this work also in order to prepare itself to get into Libra. And now Libra is the first cardinal actional air sign. Here with the air signs, mental concepts. You could be living in your mind. And again, like with fire, you might not be materializing anything. But that's why all the elements have to cooperate with each other. Otherwise, we cannot be alive. Nothing is going to work. But a lot of air means that we conceptualize, we create links, we communicate, and we work with language and words, with things that can be described, classified, ordered in that way, so that um, we are stressing on the intellectual, we're stressing also on the social. Social means here linking between people, yeah, being able to notice and also to explain to ourselves. That's something that people having a lot of air or predominant air in their charts, being able to conceptualize or explain the world to yourself and being able to survive and to get along, go around your way now this way through the mind. Maybe materially you're not very capable, maybe you have a disability, maybe um, you have this rather despondent nature, not a lot of fire, maybe emotionally things are very turbulent. But if you have a strong air element, then you're able to rationalize it and maybe solve certain problems through the mind. Libra is action on the level of society, on the level of the mind. In the autumn, when we get to the second half of the signs of the zodiac, so from Aries to Libra, we are at the bottom part of the wheel. From Libra to Aries again, we are at the top. So when we are at the top, we are now more concerned with social values. So Libra is this intellectual that uh, is acting. Very often, Libras look like Aries. I don't know if you've noticed. They kind of opposites turn into each other. But the reason why that is because these two signs are the two equinoxes. The two equinoxes are moments of equilibrium, but of also very big pressure. So you are kind of on a scale, you are balancing on a rope between two things, and it's very difficult balance. That's why you're very tense and very stressed out. Also, you are supposed to be some sort of a leader, Aries and Libra. But Aries is a leader of life, leader of biological survival. It needs to show everybody else how to overcome danger so that it survives as an individual organism. While Libra has to show others how to cooperate or how to all follow certain social things that would again help us to survive, but because we are following those things and we are having them like common rules that we live by. So Libra is like a perfect politician, a perfect diplomat, a perfect harmonizer between elements which are otherwise not compatible, and it needs to make it so that everything is linked and works together coherently. But in order to achieve that, it has to never stop trying and being out there. Libra is masculine. Being air, it's actional, it's out there, it's extroverted, even though it's got all those aesthetic qualities related to it. But it's very actional, which is why very often it can feel and sound more forceful than it actually is. Uh, then after that, because again we go into the wheel in order. So after Libra, if we travel down the zodiac, the next air sign we meet is Aquarius. And here, Aquarius is very late in the wheel, so it would be intellectualizing on the highest level possible. When I say highest level, I mean that it's going to be dealing with ideas about how things work out there in the world, and wanting to suggest how they should, how whatever already has been built as a system, as a status quo, is supposed to be changed or analyzed, or maybe amended, maybe completely destroyed and started again. If we go back to this life being born in Capricorn in the winter solstice, if you want to consider that for a second, then Aquarius would be the second sign after this happened. And that's interesting because there is this insecurity again going on. Sagittarius is an intellectual sign like Aquarius. People sometimes cannot distinguish what is it the main difference between the two. Sagittarius is openly curious about the world and its concepts in order to recharge its own internal enthusiasm, and there is no fear so much. There is more like open-hearted exploration, future oriented, while Aquarius is afraid of something. It is again trying to stabilize something, like Leo and Taurus. But here it needs to be very certain how things are, what they mean, how they work intellectually, and is seeking to explain them in order to control them. So very often it gets very political because it's very willing to cling to being part of something social, something greater. As there is this feeling of personal insecurity in Aquarius. So as a separate entity, as a separate person, Aquarius feels that the world is very scary unless it joins hands with other people who are fighting for the same cause. Yeah, they are fighting for the same thing. They're believing in the same thing, or they kind of order the world in the same way. So it is very willing to look for friends, for associates, for like-minded people. Mind here because it's air, intellectual. So it's looking for people that think like it, yeah, so that it feels secure. And imagine you are like a member of a political party, and I don't know, that your party is the Liberal Party, and then there is a conservative as well. But you are so uh, intellectually binded by your allegiance to the Liberal Party that you can't even imagine for a moment that you're going to accept the reality and the knowledge and the truth of the other side. You need the confrontation even because you need to very closely define where you stand intellectually. Anyway, Gemini. Gemini, the last, even though it's the youngest of the three, because it's mutable. That's why it's the last. And here we have this very childlike curiosity, but the curiosity leads to learning. Again, the key word is learning. If it's mutable, it's learning something. Gemini is very simply learning languages, concepts, numbers, names. It's orienting itself in the environment of all this information that's already there when it gets born. And it just needs to see where it is and to memorize a lot of things, to conceptualize a lot of things. It doesn't want to be the author of any of them. It doesn't want to fight other people or to assert a certain concept against another. It's just concerned with learning. The more it knows, the more it experiences, the better it feels. So it's just hungry for that sort of information. And being very unstable, going, not being able to dedicate itself to only one thing. That's why, because Gemini is not supposed to dedicate itself to one particular thing. It needs to spend a lot of its time looking around and being open to new experiences, even contradictory things. Saying one thing one moment, thinking the other the next moment. That's not hypocrisy with Gemini. That's this sort of intellectual curiosity which gets it to different places and allows it to remain with eyes open. Finally, water. Here we are in the realm of emotions. Emotions, like intuition with fire, are things without words. We cannot really say what that is. We need to feel it. We need to kind of experience it on an internal level. So earth and air are more material and real, while more objective, while fire and water are more subjective elements. That's what they have in common. And here we are still in the feminine zone, even maybe the most feminine zone and the most sensitive one. So the world of uh, not just emotion, but also Stephen Rowe says soul, the spiritual, the soulful. That's what water is concerned about. Being able to attune yourself to the condition and to the feelings of other people naturally, and taking that into account, but also being able to express your emotions and your reactions in a outflowing way which is not blocked. Wherever we have a lot of water, we have a lot of toxicity. So people with a lot of water in their charts, they usually, even physically, need to eliminate a lot of waste material all the time because it tends to accumulate. So it's so important for the water not to stagnate. The cardinal water summer solstice Cancer is maybe the most, how can I say, well, it is cardinal because it's again actional. Now it needs to act on its emotions. What does this mean? Whenever Cancer feels something very strongly, and that's usually the case, it's feeling the most strongly from all of them, because here with the early signs of the zodiac, everything is so personal that the personal feelings are the most important, and they're being registered, they're being accounted for. So Cancer is constantly watchful about its own feelings, and usually, like the flow of a river, can you see how rivers flow like in a line, like what I said about cardinal signs, in a straight line? So rivers are like imaginary lines of water flowing through in one single direction. It starts from wherever this river starts, and then it goes down into one straight line. And uh, this is very characteristic of this sort of, I'm going to go after wherever my feeling is taking me. Those emotions that I experience, they're going to be the source of my actions. If I feel good, I'm going to do this. If I feel bad, I'm going to do something else. And I need to organize my world according to this feeling nature that I've got inside me. That's Cancer. So, very directional again, very single pointed. Scorpio brings us to the group of the insecure ones. By the way, I forgot something. Aquarius has this funny phrase about it: social security. Social air, intellectual, social security. That phrase, social security, is very Aquarian, because Aquarius is looking for this sort of security. What sort of security is Scorpio looking for? Emotional, of course, because it's water. So, in order to feel safe and able to control itself, well, they're all very controlling, the fixed ones. It has to do certain things in order to get that sense of security. Emotional security comes from successful relationships, or what we perceive as successful relationships in our case. That's why the obsession with relationships in Scorpio. It is so important, because if we feel that things are not working well in our couple, in our family relationships, whatever, then there is this panic inside starting, that we are so much dependent on this sense of built relationship. And Scorpio is willing to invest a lot of time and a lot of energy, like the other three fixed signs, to get that sort of security. Now, I hope you already see how these are different 12 motivations. And we are very motivated to do things that way because of this goal that we have. It's been very helpful to me to know, for example, that the constant intellectualizing and talk about politics, which sometimes it's too much of someone in my family, won't mention who exactly, is related to their sun in Aquarius and other things in intellectual science, that they simply need that. They need this sort of fuel in order to feel okay. If I refuse it, and if I say, well, I'm a Scorpio, so I don't want to play that game, I want to play another game, this is the basic source of conflict between us. This is also the basic source of compatibility or incompatibility. People are mostly interested, who am I compatible with? What sort of partner will be good for me? What sort of friends will be good for me? Well, the very easy simplified answer is sometimes the best for you will be those that can tolerate and can play and give you the chance to display freely without obstruction this sort of energy field that you operate on, or the elements balance in your chart that you are mostly attuned to. But sometimes you need restriction or opposition in order to again develop exactly that thing that you have in your chart. So it's very difficult to say what's good, what's bad. But I have found that if we trust the universe and life in general, it always brings us contacts with this sort of compatible or incompatible elements to ours that we need for our overall development as a chart. Let's continue with and finish with Pisces quickly so we then switch to the charts. And hopefully, I hope you like this action security learning as a key to the approach of each one of the signs, because I think that that opens a lot of things, especially when we then look at the houses of the chart. What are we supposed to do there? If you have, like I do, 6 planets in the sixth house, obviously the sixth house is about learning. So I need to be, want it or not, involved in the process of learning, teaching, in all this exchange of um, perspectives and information and so on. And through the Virgo style, it's in order to improve life here on Earth. Now, something physical, something tangible has to be improved, has to be mastered uh, because of that learning. So immediately I know very much more about what my potential vocation could be in life, especially if we look at the sun by sign and house. But then how am I going to do this? With what methods, with what styles, and what sort of temperament I would display by doing this? That is determined by the sign in which I'm being myself in the sixth house, which is in my case Scorpio. This is just an example. And then we'll do the same with you. Pisces, finally. So it's self-explanatory. Pisces, like all the other mutables, will be trying to learn something. And it's going to be very hard learning here, very painful maybe, because that last sign, being water, is going to draw its biggest lessons about life and adjust its behavior and make changes due to emotional turbulence, due to the meeting with maybe the suffering of others and the world out there, and being able to get into itself that suffering, and so well positioned to put itself in the place of others, will lead to a change of perspective, will lead to something. Like with Virgo, the imperfection of the material world leads to it trying to fix that. Pisces is trying to fix psyches and emotions and the emotional well-being of others and itself, because it is such a sponge for that. So yeah, that's the table. That's it, very briefly. And now, who do we start with? Sam, Steven? Sam, do you want to be first? Okay, let's do yours first, because Stephen, as a gentleman, will give you the lead. How are we with time? I think we have about an hour, pretty much. So let's split it between you guys. And now I'm going to just very briefly say about the chart and see where that is going to take us after you comment too. Stopping that. And so I've got Stephen. All right, give me a second, because I think I need to open another one, as you were not planned for today, Sam, or at least not completely. So I just need to open your chart. Okay. Maybe I have to share with you again to see that. Now, try to make that bigger. Okay. At first glance, the chart strikes us quite concentrated in certain places in it to the expense of others. Maybe you're using this software, Solar Fire, or something else, but most of the programs, astro.com as well, are showing you usually a table like this, which is supposed to give you the balance of the elements in the chart. I would like to tell you that I recommend you disregard this completely. Don't even look at it. Maybe I would remove it from here in the future because it's very misleading. This is not the true story of the chart. This is not the true distribution of the elements in the chart. Because what this is doing is only counting how many planets in earth, air, water, and fire you have, only the planets and signs. But in order to see what's your predisposition for each one of the four elements, we need to take into account certain factors in the chart which are weighing even more than the planets. So, for example, what is the element of the ascendant? What is the element of all the four angles of the chart? Even like, for example, here, some you have in the very first degree of Aries, your MC. So you are getting a lot of fire in your life from the fact that this is so, even though there is not a single planet in Aries in the chart. So we need to look at the angles. They are very powerful magnetic points in the chart, which are giving our orientation to these four sides that account for four different crucial experiences that we all need to go through. And we are approaching those experiences in the style of this particular four signs. Then, what about the houses? The houses are extremely personal, extremely important. That's where your life happens. That's where the action happens. So, see, for example, you don't have, well, you have the very important planet, so-called planet, the moon in Leo, but you also have 5 planets in the 5th house. So the 5th house is huge. Even if the moon was not in Leo, that 5th house emphasis would have been enough for us to say fire. Fire needs to be given a point here. We give it another point from the MC, as I already said. And I hope you see the logic of this. Do you agree with me that we need to look at this a bit more comprehensively and not just what signs are represented by the planets? Because there are other things some people look at. For example, the asteroids, like Tony mentioned in the beginning, that I used to even for a while include the 4 asteroids, the major ones, in the chart too, because I thought they were giving us the missing feminine link. Like you see how many masculine planets we've got, so-called masculine, all the outer planets. We are more used to thinking of them as masculine, like Saturn, he, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and so on. But the she is only Moon, Venus, and then I thought maybe if we include the 4 feminine asteroids, then we have a bit of a more balanced picture. But that's another story. The thing is that we can include other things if we want, and they would then start falling into signs of the zodiac, giving us points to the different elements. So I think if we stick to the planets, the usual planets that we use, then I would do it this way. What's the sun? What's the moon? So some you've got Scorpio, extremely important. Emotional security is a big theme. You would be needing to do things in order to get to yourself the feeling of emotional security. We have 5 planets or 5 things there, which definitely give us this message. But where would you most likely be able to get that from? So, what should you do in order to get emotional security? And I think we need to look for the answer in the 5th house. I would imagine that any sort of creativity action based on your imagination, your spontaneous birthing of something from yourself, just whatever comes out, in the moment, as an exchange with others, or as a performance, or as maybe something that you do in your own time behind the scenes, but then it gets displayed out there and people give you feedback. This is the kind of action you need in order to get emotional security, Scorpio. The moon is in Leo, so we have like the opposite scenario. Uh, so the Leo is obviously motivated by the same things as the fifth house action was motivated, but only temperamentally. So your moon to feel good, she is going to be, your moon is going to be, so in your personal life, maybe behind the scenes, like at home with your partner, uh, maybe you're a bit more flamboyant than you are outside in general. And this creativity is kind of bursting out from there, but it has to be very single pointed. In the first house, you need to be just not stop doing it. I think the moon, you can get ill or you can get stagnated if you become too sedentary, because the so-called Aryan nature of your moon placement requires that you're more physically active, more combative, more competitive in your being a Leo. So Leo is looking for, again, security. Like, so here you have two security problems, let's say, or security issues. The Scorpio one and the Leo one, because they're both fixed signs and they are square to one another. So it gets even more complicated. So what kind of security is Leo looking for? Identity security. So maybe if we follow the logic that if the moon doesn't feel good, she's not going to support the sun, and the sun is not going to follow its mission. Let's give something to your moon first. The moon needs self-expression, spontaneous, Leo style, fiery, optimistic, believing in the opportunities that you have in front of you. But it will not do it, it will not succeed if it is too stationary. You have to get it moving. You have to be in your everyday life as active physically as you can possibly be. And the more active, the more healthy and the more happy. And then this feeds very naturally into the fifth house action of the Scorpio sun and all the other planets in there. So this is just roughly how I would look at that. And then if we take a look at the ascendant, Cancer is related to the moon. So maybe we should have started from this, because maybe in your case, it's something like first the ascendant, then the moon, then the sun. They always like lead to one another. Because the ascendant is your first reaction to things, it's cardinal. So you are tending to act on your emotions, maybe. So whether you are out there being physical, like I just recommended, may not always be possible with you, just because this ascendant being so sensitive emotionally, the so-called action, because Cancer is cardinal, actional, depends on the mood, depends on your personal emotional state to start with. So if you're depressed, you're not going to get out and be physical because you don't have the motivation to do that. You're too exhausted from your depression, or you simply don't motivate it enough. But here's the paradox. You almost like have a stop first with this Cancer ascendant. Maybe the way you find things just there as a fact, not something that you have created, but the way you find the world around you is usually quite hurting for you, quite, it triggers your sensitivities. And you have to somehow overcome that, almost like give it a blind eye and decide, okay, I'm feeling dreadful, but I'm going to act anyway. If you're able to tell yourself that, then you cross the boundary of the ascendant, you get into the first house, and you reach out for your moon. And you reach out for your moon with a lot more optimism and enthusiasm, because she is naturally so. She is Leo. She is fiery and hungry for this sort of expressiveness. Then, if she succeeds, I think the job of the sun becomes very easy, because then Scorpio is going to not feel so emotionally insecure anymore, but feel a little bit more stable and able to follow on with the creativity project. Really follow on, because with the fifth house, and the fixed sign Scorpio, I think you're potentially able to be very productive as a creative person. You can dedicate yourself to something that you, I don't know, you start making something, or you start uh, being that Scorpio in the fifth house in one way, and you are going to be able to stick with it and to succeed and accumulate a lot over the course of time, only if you manage to overcome the struggle of the moon, the ascendant transition towards the moon. So I think here we have a situation of fire trying to emerge out of water. Of course, you've got other elements in the chart which are equally very important. You've got Mars in Earth, which is a big potential helper of that process, because this Mars in Capricorn can give you the stamina, it can give you the stability and the resistance in order to be able to keep with the action once you've started it, without looking back and without being subdued by the emotions again. As this sign Capricorn is very resistant to its personal emotions, it's very capable of disregarding what it personally feels in that moment in order to work on something else out there. So Mars is a great helper in the process. But all the others, like Mercury, Venus, they are in the Scorpio around the Sun area. So they would depend on that process more than anything else. So, yeah, I think it's generally also very little air in this chart. Now, I can say confidently very little, because not only there are only two planets and not personal planets, but we can see, I mean, I don't know, I really don't know whether your MC and IC are really the first degrees of Aries Libra. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, just because they're so close to the boundary that I don't know. My impression from you generally is that it's probably quite likely that your MC is in the end of Pisces, because I guess you might have been more tempted to be contributing to the world in terms of what you decide to take part in, what kind of work you do out there in society. I feel like it's probably more Piscean than Arian. But if this is the case, and if I'm right, let's suppose, then you don't have air as one of the corners, one of the angles. So air is not represented there. Air is not represented in the personal planets. And as far as I can see, there is only this single Chiron in the 11th house, the other two air houses, no action there. So Chiron is pretty heavy. So we can see it's also opposite the sun and so on and so forth. So I expect there will be some sort of struggle with the air, or air is simply quite unconscious. So it will be difficult to rationalize, to get yourself out of emotional ruts. So whenever things get very heavy emotionally, the air element is not really the one that helps you get out of it. So maybe you've learned to compensate. Maybe that's really not the case. And exactly because it's not obviously represented, maybe just the other way around. You are very secure there, very confident. You've got it already, so there is no need to work on it. So I'm curious, what do you think about all this, and especially about this maybe potential imbalance with the air?
I think I overcompensate with the lack of air. I find myself always trying to think everything completely through, completely logical, completely everything, even if it doesn't intuitively feel right. I think it's the way I should go. And
Yeah.
it usually take a little bit before I think, screw this, I'm going to go with my gut in the first place. But it's almost like my first instance is, yeah, I need to be logical about this. I need to think about the rules, or I think higher, like more intellectually. And then just, yeah, after a while it's like, no, this isn't right. Trust what I first felt rather than thought.
Yes, but maybe just to quickly say, maybe this rationalizing is nothing more than trying to be practical, trying to be resistant, or kind of when you said I try to be logical about the situation, it sounds more like Capricorn to me, the South Node in Capricorn. Because what you described is like an internal process of stabilizing, of kind of telling yourself how to be strong or how to be resistant or how to be,
It's more how
you
to
know,
be societally normal.
exactly, or whatever
It's more how to
normal.
fit in. It's how
Yeah,
the
yeah,
normal person would think. How should I react?
exactly, exactly. So instead of following, as you said, your emotional intuition, which is your North Node in Cancer. So maybe look, I was thinking of telling you this. If you don't have the time to go through a very comprehensive chart analysis with someone, if you don't even know their exact time of birth, so you can't even calculate the chart properly, there is something extremely powerful we can do, only focusing on the two signs, the elements of the two signs of the nodes in the chart, because that gives us a shortcut. Really, all the rest of the chart is trying to do something like that. It feels to me like your chart is one big process, one big journey of relaxation, getting used to your own emotions, dealing with them, welcoming them, using them as a source of your energy and action without being fearful that that's going to be against a norm or against society's opinion or whatever other restrictions you imagine in your head and you put on yourself. So here we see that you have a history in Earth, a history in having to do the right thing out there in society, do the right thing, action out there in society, which is Capricorn. You're very used to that. So maybe in the past you had to comply with all sorts of things because you carried a very heavy load of responsibility on your shoulders and you couldn't afford to be flippant, to be too emotional, or to be too distracted or creative in or playful. Now, this time around in this life, that's the kind of imbalance that needs to be solved. More water is needed, and that's why maybe the universe gave you so much water in the chart. But um, it's entangled in such a way that this water that you have will be afraid again because Scorpio is so afraid of losing control. So yeah, it's like a process of relaxing into the feminine side of the water energy. Yeah. So even if we just stay there, we can see that that's a very important lesson for you personally to open yourself to um, hearing, listening to, hearing what your intuition or emotion or different moods, changing moods tell you, and making decisions about action based on that, and then taking the action. And if you do that, things somehow miraculously start falling into place. That's what I believe. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, I am learning more to trust my intuition. I'm also, a lot of my life I couldn't, the relationships I was in, I couldn't express emotions. It was no point doing it. They were turned against me. So I got very used to hiding everything. And now I don't have to. And it's a learning curve,
Yeah,
because suddenly you don't have to keep every thought into your head. And sometimes there are days that I don't actually know what I'm feeling anymore, because it's like every single emotion wants to come out at the same time.
yeah,
Um, and because I'm giving myself permission to actually feel them, it can actually feel quite chaotic at the same time. And you
yes.
start
But
thinking, oh, isn't it better if I just put everything back in its box?
yeah, Yes, it needs an outlet. The water energy needs outlet more than any other because it can be the most toxic if it doesn't get the outlet. And especially with so much Scorpio, I've got the same, and I know what it is. We should not allow things to get clogged and not expressed freely. And let's just maybe complete your example by also seeing where the houses of the nodes are, because that we can look from the perspective of the elements. We look at the houses too. So here we have a double earth in the houses, double water in the double earth in the south node, double water in the north node. So again, that's a much bigger emphasis, elemental emphasis in your scenario than it would be with someone that has, the sign of one node sitting in a house which belongs to another element. Yeah. So here, obviously, Mars is also there with the South Node. So we expect that you have been dealing not just with what I already mentioned about Capricorn, but also that you have to be very on the job. I imagine you in the past as someone very much on the job, maybe a male personality, considering that Mars there, who had to be extremely strong, resistant, careful, taking care of others, being there for others, things like this. And no emotion allowed, because if you do, you can collapse, and all the world around you, where other people are involved, can also collapse. So a lot of responsibility here. Maybe you had a very demanding job, could be something else, like very demanding job where you're so concerned about the material functioning of what you're doing. You might be the operator of a very dangerous machine. Yeah, that maybe you are a pilot of a I don't know, aircraft, a war aircraft or something like this. Mars being there too. I'm just imagining different things, and imagine the strain and the concentration that requires from you. So it's very difficult to get out of the habit of being that way. But the 12th house now gets you into the territory where your own feelings mix with the feelings of others and of the world. So you might be getting tearful about all sorts of things, not just your own stuff, but also things that get changed around you, and you can experience the emotions of others. So that pulls you into the helping professions, into now helping people psychologically and not so much practically. But in order to help them psychologically, you need to be opening up to your own emotions as well, because otherwise they won't trust you, they won't talk to you, they would perceive you as someone that's you try to keep everything to yourself, but you want them to share. How about that? I mean, they won't agree. So you have to do a deal, in order to be there in the 12th house and realize your major potential there. You have to open up your heart. Yeah. So be vulnerable together with others so that they can be vulnerable in your own presence, and
Over
that would give you
the
power.
past year, I've started doing more with my healing stuff, with my Reiki, with my tarot readings, started doing events and things like that. And it's now a staple thing that we have to take tissues with us, because I'm either going to make someone else cry or they're going to make me cry. And to start with, it was like, I'm in a room of 100 people, I can't cry in public.
Mhm.
But now it's like, this is what's happening. And so, yeah, it's like that person needs me at that point to not be a stone cold face.
Yeah.
So it's like, screw what anyone else thinks at that point. I'm there for the person I'm with at that time, not everyone else that's milling around.
So very good strategy then, and very good direction. I was just thinking of the Leo part of it as well, because maybe when you are together with those people in a social situation, it will be easier to cry together or to express any sort of emotion together if you see yourselves more as children than as serious adults that have to protect their reputations and stuff
I
like that.
never had a
You know,
childhood, so I'm having it now. I
you
never
see, catching
I
up.
never had that opportunity growing up. It was just not part of the parcel of my life. So now I'm
Well,
very
we can see
entitled.
we can see in the fourth house of your chart that it must have been hard to start with, because those two planets are not easy to be in the fourth house. They show us your emotional foundation. They show us the environment that emotionally you had to grow up in, and it obviously is something to overcome. But now everything has shifted away from that fourth house, so you can have the freedom to be something else and to act in a different way. I don't remember where your progressed personal planets were right now, but I think a lot is now shifted towards the fifth and sixth house, maybe even the seventh. So more and more, it's like emerging out.
Yeah,
Okay.
a lot of people were surprised that I was pleased to reach my birthday last year because
Yeah, the
oh my
40th.
god, you're 40 now. I'm like, yes, and I am so glad to actually be here. It was one of those things. I went out, we went to the arcade, we went bowling, we did lots of silly little things. And it was more just, yeah, now I'm 40. And for some reason, I don't know why, it just felt more comfortable. I suddenly
Yes.
wasn't pretending to be an adult, but I always felt like I was pretending to be a grown up. So when they say when you look around for an older adult and you realize you're the oldest person there, and so you look for someone that's adult here. Um,
Yeah.
but now I've got to this point, it's sort of like, yeah, I can be an adult, but I don't want to be. I'm going to have fun.
Well, you can be easily an adult at the same time, but I totally agree with you that now is the time for play and for spontaneity. Maybe this is also what the so-called person before was as well. It might have been a situation when someone was born with energies in their chart, say a lot of fire that didn't get the chance to express itself. It was there. It was not that the person wasn't fiery, that they were a different kind of temperament. So that's why they were earthly, for example. But I think your case is more likely to be a case of, I'm telling you this also because of the Mars next to the South Node, that the person was fiery. They were very full of energy to go out there and play and experiment, but there were external circumstances that didn't allow them to do so. There were people or things, maybe they lived in a place or time where it was so tough, it was so demanding that they had to put up the serious face, and they had to basically adapt to the situation by becoming very serious, um, just because it was meant to be. But their inner nature, their actual nature, was different. And now maybe we start the same game again with your chart. Yeah, you see how it repeats itself. You have a childhood with constraining atmosphere, but then later on, now it's different. You can be emerging out. Yeah. Okay. Well, you keep us posted about how things are going, would you,
Yeah.
as we go along? Because I really believe this thing that you're doing in the 12th house is the right way, the right direction. Stephen, it's your turn now. And I will let you speak more than I do for a change because, yeah, I haven't really. Let's see, where is your chart? Here we go. Uh, Sorry, I'm just trying to get to it. Here we go. So we have just very quickly air, a lot of air. We've got sun in the same sign as the ascendant on the ascendant. So obviously a very big concentration here on Gemini. But then we've got other things, plenty of things mixing up. When you look at that, I mean, here, like with some, you've got a history coming from an earth sign, Virgo, going towards Pisces. So maybe you would share something similar. I don't know. What grabbed my attention is that you have a ground trine in fire. So a lot of the energies in your charts, even the masculine energies, all of your personal planets are in masculine signs, be it air or fire. So that must be something, and I can see it. But this ground trine, do you feel like the ground trine gives you a sense of completion in that element fire, or is it more kind of making you uh, not pay enough attention to it because it's quite too easy? Or how do you see it in general? How do you see your balance of elements in the chart?
Well, my primary angles are all mutable, much in the same way as Sam's primary angles were all cardinal. So for my
Yes.
primary angles to be mutable, I'm looking at it again for my ascendant and sun as being a mixed soup, which has its own chronology. Now that particularness of that trine with the uh, Jupiter, Venus, and Moon were actually frustrating in my younger years because I was waiting for something to happen. You know, it seemed, oh, I'm waiting for something to happen. But now, as an older person, I have a greater sense that I'm involved with facilitating things to happen as a mutable cross function. Because I look at my chart as being I'm working the mutable cross because all
Yes.
my primary angles are now. If my primary angles were kind of mixed up, it would meaning like they were in different elements. I would go, well, how do I mix this together? But for myself, from this Gemini perspective, I look at my personal philosophy as being asymmetrically counterbalanced. Now, asymmetrically counterbalanced for a lot of people means, well, it's all crooked. But when I look at it again from the idea of let's say a development of within astrology that's more related to an older period in a person's life than a younger period's life, that this becomes then part of an alchemical transformation, so that there is intrinsically no really conflict between the different elements. So we look at this, say, a sign is in opposition to. Well, that just really means it's in the other sign, whether it's going to be a Gemini to Sagittarius, or they say, oh, it's squared. Well, that's just looking at the geometry. But from a functional point of view, I look at being in polarity with is that allows a dynamism to work functionally like a conjunction. But the idea of the square, when it looks at it geometrically, says, "Oh, well, that makes it kind of like a peripheral, like you can't see out of the corner of your eye." But I would like to point out that the sailors in Arabia, one of the reasons why they were able to sail to China and do trade was because they had these curved triangular sails, so they could sail into the wind. And actually, sailing into the wind allowed them to sail faster because why? They would be tacking back and forth. So, from my Gemini point of view, I go, as you were pointing out, is like the reconciliation of opposites, even though they seem particularly opposite. So, in that particular regard, I look at my those seemingly because there's also that you say, well, there's that cross thing going there, but then I look at it as the idea of all displacement or all sublimation starts with displacement. And in this particular regard, now we're back to the alchemical thing of distillation. Now, like in distillation, say, okay, we have the spiritus, the spirit of things, as far as let's say liquor. But in the word in German, the word Weinbrand means burnt wine. But in English, we take the end part, brant, and make it brandy. So the idea of working on a distillation process really works well the older a person gets. Now, when a person's younger, like say in their 20s or 30s, you go, well, which directions? I've got all these conflicting, I've got these emotions here, and I have these desires here. I don't want to do that, and I have these frustrations. But the idea then of just kind of waiting for a strategy and being able to have an awareness within one's chart, which I found really helpful, is one of the things about the sense of self-understanding. When I was the 20 something, I go, God, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And then I get the chart, and here is my moon in the sixth house, and I go, oh, Stephen, you poor bastard. You're a hypochondriacal kind of individual. You've got all these psychosomatic displacements. But then as an older person, here I'm now in the healthcare business as far as this moon and Sagittarius in the sixth house. So that sense of displacement allows me an opportunity to have a sense of empathy and a greater sense of Sagittarian understanding to the complaints and illnesses of others. So then I was able to take that as a sense of self-distillation and make it into a sublimating process, which would relate to, let's say, by this 10th house North Node in Pisces, because I also have I have the this, as you notice there, the Ceres in Pisces as well. So well, that fits very well into the idea of providing service, and so then it gets back to having my primary angles as being mutable. So in one particular regard, it allows me a better focus rather than to feel like I'm being distracted as a typical Gemini kind of guy with a sun conjunct the ascendant. One of the things that I've tried to avoid is the stereotype of Gemini of being scattered and diffuse and just going from one thing to another, not really, but knowing a lot of little things, but not really focused on any one, which gets back to Samantha there with her primary angles being all cardinal. So that Samantha's got this underlying focus, but this inner frustration of that stellium that you have, Samantha, of all this Scorpio thing in the fifth house, feeling a sense of frustration because of the.
Called me Samantha since my dad died.
So for myself, when I look at another person's chart and see, let's say, the conflicting of the elements, the main point of the triplicities and the quadruplicities. So I will look at, well, how can these things be kind of blended together? Which, of course, Radlina, gets back to Rujar and the Sabian symbols, because this is where the internalization of the self-reflection becomes really functional. Now, I wouldn't be able to speak freely about this 40 years ago. I would have still been muddling around, but I can feel this sense of satisfaction living long enough to be able to see the wider perspective that the superficiality of conflicts actually have the potential for a greater sense of unfoldment.
And again, your notes are pointing exactly in that direction. Consolidation of your ideas and your direction, because obviously in the past it must have felt extremely scattered, extremely nonsensical, because I don't think that mutability necessarily is scattered as such. At the end of the day, all the signs that are mutable are searching for knowledge. They're learners, as we saw in the table. They're trying to learn something for the sake of starting again. So basically having a clarity. They're looking for clarity of vision. And this clarity of vision, which is based on what has happened already in the past, like in the fixed section of the zodiac cardinal, then gives them a new sense of beginning. And I believe you're probably at this stage of your life now that things are really clearing in your head, and you can now see the purpose of it all, the direction of it all, and you can start giving out, like you've been giving out obviously a lot. But this, you see, on the first glance, the element which is the least represented is supposed to be water in the chart, and you've got North Node there, so it's almost like work on the water kind of thing. But maybe you needed to figure things out in your own head. Maybe you needed to physically and emotionally suffer and solve practical issues in the sixth house with the moon first, before you can, in your profession, in the 10th house, because you work in the helping profession, to be able to be really now again, like a little bit like with some relaxing, to now open up more for the feelings of others, rather than trying to give others practical or intellectual solutions, which I suppose you have been tempted in the past to give intellectual solutions. Do this, practice that method, read that book, or here I've got a philosophy for you to share, or something like this. Now maybe you are figuring out that these things are very important and they're powerful tools, but where you personally can be the most effective is where you, in your everyday work life, in your profession, you can open your feeling nature to the suffering of others. And I saw you practicing this a few times here in the sessions, where I noticed that because I talk too much and you listen most of the time, there is just no way for your Gemini to be free, and it has to be like listening to others. And then time and time, but we look at the chart of someone, and I noticed that when I give you the word to then give a quick comment, because you have been having all these minutes of ability to look at it. So all the mutable signs were working behind the scenes. You somehow magically distilled this particular thing to mention that touches emotionally the person that you're commenting on. And I saw people reacting on your comments very emotionally. I don't know if you noticed that. So I don't remember particular, but I actually saw that this thing that you said, that it kind of almost like you push a button. Yeah, it sounds like a rational analysis that you put two and two together and you came to that thing, but actually you came to that thing that mostly emotionally touches them. Even now, I was thinking, who is that Samantha? We don't have a Samantha here. But no, I'm just kidding. It's just because this is something you're emotionally touched by, isn't it, Sam? That was why.
Yeah, the only person that's ever called me Samantha is my dad. He was my only family. My mum left when I was 5. From the age of about 10, I was his carer, and he died when I was 16. So I've been on my own since then. I actually had someone use daddy's girl as an insult recently, and it was like, going to accept it because yes, I am. His birthday was only 3 days after mine, so whenever I hit my birthday, I would always feel sad. It's 3 days and 30 years. So obviously, when I turned 40, I knew that he would be 70. It's kind of like it always goes together. But now I'm just accepting it more. It's sort of like, yes, he would have been 70. He was 46 when he died. So, but yeah, he's the only one that's ever called me Samantha. And as we are coming up to my birthday and his birthday, it seemed a little bit jarring to start with, because I did the same thing as you, Radalina. I was like, who's Samantha? Oh shit, that's me.
Yes. Well, I was trying to say to Stephen because of this, that Stephen, somehow, I think you have this, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what my impression, that because of all this intellectual energy in your chart, it's powerful. It's so much fiery, airy, but very intellectual in general. Also, because of the Virgo. Virgo is a very intellectual earthly sign because its field of operation is the mind again, even though it's trying to work with the physical world. It's
Well, see,
classifying it, sorting it.
that's a point of irony, because actually my Saturn in Virgo is in that proverbial square aspect of my sun. So that's an inhibiting factor. But looking at it from the mutable point of view, as the younger person, of course there was obstacles, but now as the older person, I'm able to see that that square actually allows me an accelerated process between the Gemini overview as far as the Mercury, and the Virgo for the Mercury sense of focus. So the idea of having the focus with the overview kind of connected in seemingly conflicting signs as far as being a square, but actually they work very well together. And again,
They're stimulating each other. They're not. I really am against this positive negative aspect idea, which is so popular and so out there with everyone. There are no negative aspects, there are tense aspects. So sometimes you need the tension to open up the potential. This is what the squares are. They're turning points. They are moments of you probably would have had to make decisions, to change strategy, to look at life in a different way because of that pressure. But that was only positive in the whole scheme of things. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to say, by this being very intellectual, the chart, that maybe, and this is getting better with the years, the major struggle has been that your mind is so active and so eager and so capable, and obviously also experienced in that field of being operating through the mind because of the self node, that it just as a counter effect makes the water struggle, the water in the chart, and not because it's not strong as well, because we can see that you are potentially very strong in water, but it's kind of when you are lost in your head, when you think too much, when you conceptualize a lot, when you pay attention to every single detail and you're so good with words, this kind of takes a lot of space and doesn't leave a lot of space for the water.
Becomes emotionally erosive, and I'll acknowledge that.
Exactly.
Emotionally erosive. And I look at that, I go, oh my gosh, I'm no different than anybody else. So it allows me a better sense of a compassion, empathy to the emotional erosion that we kind of all exist in. I mean, back to Samantha being in Britain, certainly this class structure, and here you are with all this scorpionic energy, and with the Saturn and Pluto in this Libra. You know, you experience social injustice as a sense of entrenched idealism that you as an individual can do very little about, other than feel an emotional erosion. And in that particular regard, I will get caught up in these kind of more concrete and abstractions of thought that I go, oh my gosh, Stephen, that is so emotionally erosive. So I have the idea of like, now, Stephen, you're being involved in morbidity of thought, and I try to catch that before it catches me.
Well, I think you are doing really well. To me, you're very masculine energy person in terms of rather optimistic, more than pessimistic, to a point where you're such a contrast to me that people like you give me the needed balance of. You see, I just wanted to point this out as an example. Sometimes people that are very different from you are the ones that you need, at least every now and then, to balance you out. Because I can see that it's very likely you might have had a very difficult life. And even though you're much older than me, it already feels like my life is already a lot easier than yours, or a lot more pleasurable in this kind of sense, the general sense. But I'm so much more ungrateful because I'm so much more critically negative. So even the good things I'm constantly not happy about because I want even more. Or I see the fault. You know, Scorpio in the sixth house with all this and other things, it's more prone to seeing the fault in things. So what's the one thing missing among the 100 and focusing on that, while you're the other way around. You know, if one thing is good among 10, you would focus on that and move forward from there, which is such a gift, such a gift. And sometimes people like me or others which are actually more not like me, but people that are, for example, suffering, really suffering, emotionally mostly, then they balance you because you are so optimistically positive that sometimes maybe you need, in other words, you may need a bit of Pisces stuff, the hard truths of life, ending of life and things like this. The Pisces world is very heavy, isn't it? The Pisces world is very heavy, and it needs you to bring your positivity to it, and you need it to bring a bit of emotional relief to you. That's how I see it.
Well, that's a very good point in that particular regard, because the idea of having that intrinsic mutable Gemini sense of connectiveness, and the idea of being able to experience the primacy of that connectedness ends up being a personal frustration, because I can have an enthusiasm, but if I have no one to share the enthusiasm with, then it becomes a morbidity of thought. And in that particular part, that's one of the reasons why I enjoy so much being involved in these webinars, because we get to express these things that a lot of other people are conversationally curious about, but they ain't personally interested.
Very good point, Stephen, about this last thing you said. I never thought of it this way. But I think you are up to something here again, that sometimes we're not intellectually honest. This is a big topic for your energies, for all the mutable energies, and especially Gemini. This is one of the main topics there. Whether or not we are intellectually honest. And that's not just about shifting the truth or things like this. It's also about sometimes we're curious in an intellectual way about things, including other people's personal world, their emotions. Like in conversations like this, sometimes things come up that make people vulnerable. And that's more than normal. And some people get vulnerable because they agree to get involved in such stuff. And if we are only each one of us sitting on the intellectual side of things, and I have this tendency a little bit, then we might hurt the other person, yeah, or betray their trust. So I think the whole conversation today, because of the two examples of you and Sam, revolves very much around daring to go into the elements which lead to more vulnerability, even if we don't have them very represented in our chart, or if we have some sort of blockage in our chart towards that. Because if we manage to do this and be open, then this gives the right setting for others to be as well, in a like creates the safe space. I think in your profession, Stephen, 10th house is Pisces, North Node is there. Pisces is dynamically linked with the other mutable signs, let's call it this way, and very active. I think you are giving people safe space more than anything else. And then from that basis, you can intellectualize and you can give them practical solutions. So it's always like do the North Node so you can do the South Node kind of thing. Yeah, learn how to do your North Node well, so you can be allowed to go back to yourself and do that. And you might have been frustrated throughout your life that the very logical, practical, and reasonable, sensible, objective solutions that you have been giving people were not properly understood or absorbed or accepted. And maybe the moment you started being like giving the safe space, being compassionate, showing your own emotion, giving them the chance to be weak and vulnerable and so on, or simply working with people who are that way, that opened up, did it, the opportunity to apply the other three mutable signs.
And I'll acknowledge that statement as well, Radlina, because as a younger guy, this Uranus in Cancer in the first house, it's a collective, it's a generational thing.
Yeah.
But where's that? And now as the older person, having that in a nice trine relationship to, again, that North Node in Pisces, but for Uranus being in the first house, it reminds me to be psychologically open to my own nakedness. And in that
Yes.
particular part, what you were saying about the self-honesty, this is something that any individual really comes to terms with the older that they become. Because a lot of times when people are younger, they're looking about enhancements, about making them be something that they think is to be commoditized. And, in that particular part, this whole Gemini thing of spiraling in thoughts and communications, stage presence and all that stuff, I often feel embarrassed for a lot of those people. A lot of Gemini types that go, oh my gosh, I'm just kind of embarrassed for you, because I sense that because I recognize that as an intrinsic vulnerability within myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe finish off by saying that this Uranus in the first that you mentioned is maybe the biggest single supporter of the mission of the North Node. This beautiful trine.
Thank you, because that's something that I've been working on for a long time, and you're kind of the first person who kind of spots that as well.
Great. Well, maybe we should stop here then.
All right.
Because I always get concerned. I hold you guys up for a long time because we can continue on and on and on. It's extremely interesting, pleasurable for me, the company as well. So I hope you enjoyed it too. And next time we'll continue in 2 weeks. I'll be in London then, and hopefully we can have another conversation like this. Thanks a lot, Sam and Stephen, for the examples.
Can I just add that I
yeah.
agreed with what you were saying about Stephen when he comments on other people's charts. I always look forward to seeing his microphone go off from mute because I know he's about to start commenting. So I really enjoy hearing and seeing other people's faces when you're talking about what you see in their charts. It's enjoyable to watch from my point of view.
Likewise. Okay, well, keep up your interest and everything you guys do. Thanks again for today. And yeah, I'll see you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Later.